Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 101. We're going to be covering The Evil Dead, the Sam Raimi film from 1981, and Evil Dead 2, the Sam Raimi film from 1987. You can email us at whattthe, at scarythoughts.org. Do you have anything to plug?
No, man. I've just been living out here in the woods for a few months, so I got nothing to plug. Not that I usually do anyway.
We'll get into that in a minute. I have something to plug. It's been the same thing for a year because if you've been listening, my band with Andy Connors, My Heart and Inverted Flame, did this EP series where we released one EP per month for a whole year, and we just finished it out. We did all 12 EPs. Actually, if you buy all of them, there is a 13th EP that we will send you. It's only for people who bought all 13. And you can get to that through Bandcamp, My Heart and Inverted Flame. Just search for it. It's there. You can also get to it from markcate.com. It's easy. Anyway, yeah, so this is possibly the longest break we've taken between episodes, and I think we owe it to our lovely listeners to explain why.
Yeah, people were asking, well, you got the Rona.
I did.
That kicked it off.
Wasn't too bad. I think what actually kicked it off is that for episode 101, which is a palindrome, I wanted to finally do the episode that I had been ruminating on for years now, which was about time loop horror. Many years ago, I had this idea about recursion as a theme in horror movies and was working on it and putting off actually finalizing it. And in the meantime, there were like more and more movies that deployed time loops as a device in horror films. And we recorded it and we did that episode. And I got about halfway through it and my own little personal QC department rejected it. And that's the first time that's happened with any of our episodes.
Yeah, and I think you were being a little hard on it. I don't think it's like a terrible episode or anything. It's certainly not one of our worst. I just don't think it like did what you wanted it to do. And so I think we might just re-explore it at a different time. I just didn't think many of the movies that were kind of part of the interesting theory that you had come up with were that good to kind of support it. Like, for example, Groundhog Day is, to me, the most interesting movie to talk about like that. And then that's not necessarily horror, so that kind of undercuts the idea of time loop horror.
Yeah. I think there were two things that happened in that episode. I still do want to revisit it. Maybe it'll even be our next episode, and that episode might be an improved version of the one we attempted, or maybe we should just cover Groundhog Day. There's a lot to talk about, and I think under the umbrella of talking about horror and philosophy, I think Groundhog Day is still, even though it's not a horror movie, I think it still can be that text. But in our recording of this, that episode, I was off. I was just like not very present for a thing that I had planned on doing for years. So maybe a little or a lot was riding on it for me. I was very invested in it going well, but I think I also was really not articulate and really didn't meet the challenge. Also, if I may say, I don't want to call you out too harshly, but you were in a fucking mood. and and me saying that about Chad Lott is like, but somewhere between me being inarticulate and you being kind of pissy, it just kind of wasn't our best moment in the middle. So anyway.
Yeah, I think part of it too is I just hate all those movies. I just don't like them very much. Yeah. To me, like Happy Death Day was just annoying to watch. Just the whole deal, like none of them. But also, like, we should wait until I'm back on drugs in September to do that episode, because I definitely I decided to take a year off of smoking the devil's lettuce, and let me tell you, folks, it was a mistake. It has been a misery. Like, I've been out and one of the reasons why we haven't done an episode in a while, other than the previously mentioned reasons, is, my wife and I, our house is being worked on. So I decided to go up to Oregon to live in this cabin for a couple months with our dogs. And I should have been smoking dope the whole time up here. It would have been so much more fun if I had been getting high all the time. And I've come to this conclusion that meditation is lame and drugs are awesome. And I got way more out of drugs than meditation. So when I make my year of both, I'm doing the switcheroo and getting back to fun time Chad.
So you are still not smoking cannabis, but you are still pursuing TM?
Yeah, I've still been doing transcendental meditation. I've been doing it as prescribed, exactly as the way you're supposed to do it, 2 times a day. I have not missed a session. And I'm just not that into it anymore. Like, it just seems like...
Oh, that's so disappointing.
Like, it's kind of like really like... I feel like it's diminishing returns for me. And I think really like all mindful pursuits like that have been the same for me. Like if I work out, I can do 40 chin-ups now. You know what I mean? And, eventually I'll become more decrepit and older and not be able to do the same sort of shit. But like I can see progress. With the transcendental meditation, maybe this is just the way, or meditation in general, I just don't see a progress. And I find that like, I'm kind of with Terrence McKenna in the whole thing where he was like, the story of the man who meditated for 40 years and was able to levitate over a river. And the guy standing next to him was like, well, you could take the ferry right there and it's just a nickel. To me, weed is the ferry, and it's a nickel. And I don't know, man. I definitely don't buy into any of the mythology surrounding any of the various meditation practices. And I was talking to somebody about transcendental meditation, and they were like explaining like this is like kind of a teacher, and they were talking about the cities and all that. That shit is so fucking stupid. All that flying yoga nonsense where it's just a bunch of dudes that look like Moby not jerking off and jumping up on pads in a room. I mean, it's just not for me. And I find like I really have been thinking a lot about like how a lot of my life's been very quiet and contemplative from reading and sitting and writing. And I just don't need another sitting still practice in my life.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
Like I found way more insight in getting just nearly blackout stoned and wandering around my neighborhood at night, just thinking about crazy shit. Like,
right.
But, I'm sure you could easily say like, well, this is just drug talk, like, of course. But I don't know, man. I think I was better creatively having more fun. And that's really what it comes down to is just fun. It's a thing that is fun to me. And meditation is not fun to me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's ever been fun for me, but I also can't imagine my life without it. I think it'd be a mess without it.
Yeah, I guess like I haven't noticed really a whole lot. I mean, I know probably if you go back and listen to a few episodes when I was a little fresher to TM, I was probably a lot more like, yay about it. But
yeah,
I feel like I was expecting, as David Lynch talked about it, like just to be this constantly getting more and more and more and more out of it. And I would say I've just kind of leveled out and experienced it. And after a year, I'm going to call it quits and probably like the fucking morning pages, like the Artist's Way morning pages, that shit I continually got more and more and more out of the more I did it. And to me, like that's kind of what I'm measuring this against, and then fucking TM takes like 40 minutes a day. So I haven't been doing the morning pages really. And I just restarted that shit. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I think smoking dope and doing the morning pages is going to be my path towards enlightenment.
The paths are many, Chad.
Yeah.
Maybe tell everybody where you are, what it's like, and how it got us to cover these 2 movies.
Well, I'm in this like cabin house. That's really, I guess it's more of a cabin than a house. Who knows what the line is? But anyway, like there's a well that the water comes in from, and the heat is with the wood stove, if that gives you any idea. And I'm up in Oregon, about 40 minutes outside of Bend, and there's goats and a few acres of trees, and it's fucking great, man. And so I was just up here thinking about cabin movies, and the best 2 are Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. So that's where we're at. And this is not exactly a very critical episode because we both love those movies. So
yeah, for sure. Also, of course, because you're up there, we are back on Zoom for the first time in quite a while. We have done every episode in person religiously until early COVID knocked us off that for a moment. But I guess while you're up there, how much longer are you up there?
Probably just another 2 weeks or so.
Okay, so we might be back in person for the next episode, whatever that is.
Yeah, I mean, right. I would love to stay here forever, but
yeah,
But also, you have started school. That's another big one. So we've got the episode fit. We've got the episode collapse. We've got COVID. We've got my diaspora and your education.
Yeah, I'm in grad school, everybody, and I am still in that very beginning stage where I can't tell if I'm going to be quite busy or completely freaked out for the next 2.5 years. I'm very unsure.
Well, it depends on how much Adderall you get.
Honestly, I think I would do more for my ability to embark on grad school by cutting out refined sugars and, heavy carbo loading than taking drugs. I think I would have more mental clarity by eating better and getting just even slightly more exercise.
Probably, but at the same time, like up here, I'm like 10 miles away from the nearest restaurant, and I don't have a car, so I'm like basically stuck up here until my sister-in-law comes and picks me up, taking me to the grocery store once a week. So I've been living off of the cleanest diet I've ever lived on, and so all I do is lift weights, eat deer meat and berries, like literally, and some wild salmon that I've been ordering, and like I'm pretty shredded, but I don't feel like any sharper. I don't think. Like it looks like the TM thing. It's probably doing something, but I just I think having fun is the most important thing. Is what I really like come to realize up here. Like it's nice to be isolated and have everything be super strict and everything, but it really only takes you so far.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But these abs are on point, bro.
You should post a photo of them to the Instagram page.
No thanks.
Just draw a pentacle on them or something. You'll get so many likes.
No, just like pose with just some VHS pictures.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You need to hold up a copy of The Fog on VHS in front of your app.
Yeah, I think like my wife and you are the only people I've shown like progress photos to.
We are the two most invested.
And I would never send them around.
Okay. Well, sorry, everybody. It would be kind of amazing if the Scary Thoughts Instagram account turned into like this thirst trap thing that you. Never mind.
Yeah, so that brings us to Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, and to a lesser extent, Army of Darkness and Match vs. Evil Dead. But honestly, this might be our first spoiler-free episode.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah,
we don't really talk about any of the plot at all. We really are more focused on the making of this shit and kind of horror comedy as a thing in general, I think. So if you've never seen these movies, I mean, what the fuck are you doing? But you could totally listen to this episode, no problem, and still enjoy those movies.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get to it. So where do we want to start with this one?
Well, Evil Dead is great. And for my tastes, it's everything I like about horror, because I kind of like skew more to liking horror comedy more than anything else. And I also love the whole myth of the friends since high school get together and scrappily make a picture that pushes everyone to superstardom, or most everyone anyway. This checks all of my like Hollywood fantasy boxes.
Yeah, it's not an ensemble cast, but there's more of like, I guess I would say, an ensemble filmmaking pack gang that is definitely really cool.
Yeah, the only actor that really went forward is Bruce Campbell. Everybody else is kind of like selling carpets in Michigan or whatever.
Which is fine. I think for myself, coming away with rewatching these movies, I'm a fan of Evil Dead 2. The other movies, not so much. Like the thing of Evil Dead, I think is really fun and really interesting, and I think there's a lot to talk about. And I love the very clunky, weird, idiosyncratic mythology that they built within these films. But I feel like The Evil Dead, the first one, is a great, scrappy little low budget movie. Evil Dead 2 is amazing. Army of Darkness is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I hate it so deeply.
Well, we were chatting about this, and the problem with you is you didn't see it when you were 13.
I did not. That is true.
Yeah, and it's such a like cartoonish movie. I mean, to me, all these movies are in the vein of Joe Dante's Gremlins too. You know, they're like basically like cartoon logic with like slapdash mythologies and a lot of heart. You know, and it, to me, it's like what real horror cinema is, which is like a type of like surrealism that investigates death, but in a fun way. And I think they all do it. And then, you know, like this is more autobiographical, but you know, like I was playing D&D in the garage, eating Domino's pizza when Army of Darkness was coming out, you know, and it's like, it's just perfect for that. I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like, it's definitely not the best of them. You know what I mean? I don't think it like, I mean, I think Ash is his best in it. It's the most Ash of even the series, you know. I think it's the most like Bruce Campbell to the max, but everything else about it, I don't know. But it's just gags. It's just a series of gags.
It is. I think they're gags that are, I mean, they're juvenile, but I think they also haven't aged well. Like when we think of comedies from the 70s and 80s that are kind of wincy today, I think that Army of Darkness is like that. I think I disagree about, Ash is the most Ash in Army of Darkness, sure, but I feel like Evil Dead 2, because you see even the slightest, flimsiest arc of how he gets there, I find it more endearing. I feel like I'm more on his side, and so when he goes from like crazy out of control, doesn't know what's going on, to groovy, I'm on his journey. Whereas Army of Darkness, he's just sort of a one note.
Yeah, I could see that easily being your favorite because, you know, in Evil Dead, he's basically a final girl, and then Army of Darkness, he's basically an action hero, and then Evil Dead 2 is just this really neat, fun combination of those two things.
Totally. Yeah, I think that is a really interesting thing also about these movies is that it's kind of a slasher that doesn't have a final girl. So especially Evil Dead 2 has its own logic even there. Like he's not entirely the hero. I mean, he is the hero, but he's not just like Dirty Harry. He's the hero. He does have a little bit of that final girlness because he is in peril for the majority of it.
Yeah, something else I like in the mythology. I mean, the mythology is like all over the place. Even on this, if you follow it through the show, the TV show, they expand it, but certainly don't really clarify it at all. It just like it still doesn't make sense, which I think is kind of great. But he's kind of this like chosen one character, and I think like what Sam Raimi does, it's really fun. Is it's like you realize that the chosen one's kind of the problem, and I love that about this. Like imagine if in the Matrix, like Neo was the reason why everything was shitty and just couldn't admit it. I mean, that's kind of like what's going on here. And I love it. It's just so goofy.
Yeah, it's pretty excellent. I dig what you said about Joe Dante because, you know, I always, whenever we do these episodes, I have this kind of template with a lot of words on it that I just kind of run through of things we've talked about before and ideas about horror and just sort of like plug in some ideas as a way to think about things. It's funny because all of the tropes and the recycled ideas that I think about with horror, every one of those as they relate to these movies is chaos. So like, what are the rules of engagement? Total chaos. What are the methods of vanquishment? Total chaos. Does this follow the logic of progressive entrapment? Total chaos. Do we have to suspend our disbelief and how? Yep, but it's chaos. Is there a logic to the violence? Nope, it's chaos. You know, like there's just no linearity between the films or within the films. But it gives you a reason. Like the gag is far more important than the logic, or the violence is far more important than the logic in a way that really works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joe Dante's kind of on my mind because I listened to this like 4-hour conversation between Quentin Tarantino and Eli Roth, and they spend like a certain amount of time talking about like why Gremlins 2 is important, even though nobody like knows about it anymore, really. But one of the things he said, which I thought was really kind of interesting, like I think Tarantino is really almost at his best talking about movies, you know. And he said that Gremlins 2 and horror in general is like film at its purest. Like it's really about the visual and the sound effect and the moment and the shot, and it doesn't really necessarily need to be about the narrative, although having the narrative justifies all that stuff. And this has like just enough of a narrative to justify it, but it constantly abandons its own internal logic, which, you know, I think in Evil Dead, it was like a bug, and later on it becomes a feature.
Yeah, I can see that. I also kind of dig, I'm glad you brought up Gremlins 2 in particular, because I might be forgetting other examples, but I feel like, you know, Gremlins is a bit of a comedy, but Gremlins 2 is totally out of control and has way more gags. Like Chainsaw, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's nothing funny in that movie that I can think of, depending on how you want to read the violence. But Chainsaw 2 is like amped up comedy version of the first movie. And the Evil Dead 2 is the same gesture. Like the sequel is the comedy, and the way the comedy is derived is taking all the ideas of the original movie and amplifying them and making them out of control.
Yeah. And then, you know, a lot of those elements that are out of their control are like literally out of their control, like not having the rights between the different films and things like that, and all the choices they had to make, or, you know, just absurd like fetishization of the old 88. Just all that stuff is just so funny. And I was trying to think about like whether or not I would call like the Deadites, for example, as iconic. I mean, I guess somewhere like people are influenced by it. I think people are definitely influenced by the camera movements that Sam Raimi does, but no one really does it. It's like I would consider this auteur filmmaking, you know, in the realist sense of it, and it's so original, where it's like, you know, it's up there with like Kubrick to me, as having its own style, which I think is so cool. Whenever somebody develops, like you could look right at this and tell Sam Raimi did it, you know, in the same way that you can look at that new Doctor Strange movie. I've only seen the trailers, but like it's immediately apparent that it's Sam Raimi, as was the Spider-Man movies he did. And that to me is like peak art.
Right. I think there's also something interesting in looking at these movies in terms of the story of filmmaking, something you brought up as far as, you know, they're this group of kids who grow up making films together. You know, this series was based on a short they did called Within the Woods, and then they basically reshot it as The Evil Dead, even recycling some shots. And then they remade it again as Evil Dead 2, yet again, even recycling some shots. And so, you know, it's kind of a joke that you can go like, yeah, Evil Dead 2 is just a remake of The Evil Dead. It's not a sequel. It's kind of both. It's kind of a sequel and it's kind of a remake, but they are also both a remake of the short film that was made, that preceded even The Evil Dead. And then, of course, there's the reboot from 2013 that did you try and watch it? Did you watch it?
I mean, I got like 8 minutes into it and fell asleep. Yeah. So I have no real. I mean, I was listening to some reviews of it, just overall conversations about Evil Dead on YouTube, and people like seem to like not hate it, but definitely don't even consider it in the same league. I think the big criticism that people have for it is they have this backstory with like some mother or something like that. I don't know. I didn't watch it, but there's like they introduce this justification for the characters being there or something weird like that, which is like, I would say completely unnecessary for the rest of the films, and the film would be better off for it for not having that.
Sure. I don't feel either way about that sort of thing, but I got about 20 minutes into it and wide awake shut it off. I just realized it was a waste of my time. I really did not like it. Just thought it was so mediocre.
Yeah, how far did you get into the series?
I got pretty far. I really like it. I'm totally on board with that series. I think it's smart and clever and fun, and yeah, has good ideas in it.
Yeah, it's super. I remember when I watched it the first time, I got one episode into it, and it was kind of turned off by like the CGI blood. I was just like not in the mood. Also, just not in the mood to like commit to a series of any sort. And then I watched it this time, and it is pretty fun. I mean, it's like there's definitely like there's good charisma between the actors. A lot of the kills are pretty funny. Like they're like pretty good. And then they do use quite a bit of like practical effect blood as it goes through. I wish they would just commit to like having no CGI. I guess you can't. You wouldn't be able to afford to do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. You know, it's fun. I think if you're like a super fan of this, if you got like an Evil Dead tattoo, you'd be stoked to watch it. I probably won't watch the rest of the series.
I think I will. And even though I didn't like Evil Dead 2013, I'm definitely pretty curious and maybe even excited about Evil Dead Rise, which is supposed to be coming out later this year. Although I looked at the IMDb page, and I will say it seems to be another horror movie where I don't recognize any of the actors, but they all look like supermodels. So I don't know.
Yeah, like I mean, that's one of the things that this whole series really had going for it, with the exception of the actress in the series. Nobody's really like conventionally hot. I guess Bruce Campbell is in a comical way. Like their whole, you know, like I read If Chins Could Kill recently, and you know the whole idea that he was just really trying to be like a real actor and just completely got derailed by all this stuff is hilarious to me.
Oh yeah, there's no turning back for him.
He has like the perfect example of a genre career. You know what I mean? He's like going to the conferences, shaking people's hands, taking pictures, and that whole deal.
I mean, why not? No matter what, no matter who you are.
Yeah, it's probably pretty fun. I think there's like a Star Trek documentary I watched a while back. Like a long time ago, like early 2000s, that kind of like covered that circuit. And it's just funny, you know, you're like, you know, third ensign on the second episode of the third season of Star Trek Next Generation. And you kind of have like managing the Applebee's money just for showing up at these things, you know?
Yeah, if you're ever late on rent, you always have something to fall back on. Just show up at a convention and sign some photos.
It's kind of interesting to see in like culture right now, like people kind of playing more to their fans. I guess it's because there's such a back and forth now, you know, that fans can reach out and have this communication back and forth. Like I was watching Christina Pazsitzky's comedy special on Netflix. You know, she's married to Tom Segura, and they have that Your Mom's House podcast. It's like so many of her jokes, but on one hand, she's like very Roseanne-ish in her humor, but there's a lot of like callbacks to the podcast, which I thought was kind of like, I mean, I like the podcast, so it's hilarious to me, but it's just weird. It's almost like, you know, you're Urkel and you're on stage in Hamilton and go, did I do that? Like just in the middle, you know, like or something like. It's like he wouldn't be able to help himself.
Right. Weird. Backing up a second.
But there's that in Sam Raimi's movies, though, is kind of my point. Like that old 88 is in most of his movies.
Oh, really?
Like, and that, yeah, it's in Spider-Man. I think it's smashed in Spider-Man. I think it might even be, it's in Drag Me to Hell. Like, it's just like it's like a callback. It's just like this gag.
Right. Although that's a lot less lampshaded than maybe an entire piece of dialogue for comedy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, depending on who you are, right? Like if you're like a fan of Evil Dead, you know that car, you're like, oh shit, and like to normal people, they'd never notice it.
Right. Yeah. You were talking earlier about the CGI blood being an issue for you in Ash versus Evil Dead. One thing that I love about Evil Dead 2, speaking of a bug that's actually a feature, is the animation is so like I'd say half the practical effects are legitimately like in a sense terrible, but also imaginative and funny, that it overcomes how janky they are. And it kind of is some of the best moments in the movie are like, for example, what's her name? dancing with her head cut
the girlfriend,
off.
yeah.
Yeah, it looks like, on one hand, it looks terrible. On the other hand, it's so terrible, it's funny. And on top of that, the scene is funny. So it all sort of elevates.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's what's the other thing that's kind of fun about it is like, it's very much like a tribute to Ray Harryhausen animation style. And it's one of those things that gives the movie a look. Like, I think if you were like to sit in theater and be like a horror fan at the time, you're like, oh, I want to see some real shit, you would maybe be like, oh my God, what the fuck is this? But think about like how it gets deployed later in Beetlejuice, for example. You know, it becomes this sort of stylistic decision that's pretty rad. I mean, like, you have the animation sequence in the Babadook as an example.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think it definitely sort of it's weird. It's like, it kind of like takes you out of it a little bit. But with something like Evil Dead, like, how far into it could you have really been? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even like, I don't know what the scene is generally referred to as, but where the entire room is laughing at him. You know, the books are opening and closing, and the lamp is sort of following him around. Like, that's like janky haunted house stuff.
Yeah, totally.
You know, that is like as low budget practical effect as you could get, but it's just done to such a full degree that it ends up being really effective.
Yeah, I actually looked online to see if anybody was making a reproduction of the deer head that looked like that.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, I want to have that for that cabin I'm staying in right now. Because, I mean, like, I guess one of the things for listeners is we haven't had an episode out in a while, and I've been living in this cabin up in Oregon for a couple months now, and my dream is to remodel it into like a kitschy horror cabin, kind of.
Yes.
Like, I think, like, not too much, you know, just like, you can get like a reproduction of the Camp Crystal Lake hand-painted sign. I think that would be cool, hung in the kitchen, like that sort of stuff. But like, definitely, like, you know, the haunted cabin thing, I feel like Evil Dead really like defined it. You know, Cabin in the Woods is really referencing it heavily. But they talk about in the director's commentary that they were basically trying to make it look as much like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house as they could. And what's kind of like interesting about that is like all that's informed by Ed Gein. So this is like kind of like Ed Gein's home decoration grandchild.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I also love the complete lack of logic that when they pull up, the whole cabin is about the size of my living room, but inside it's like a TARDIS, you know, it's like a 5-bedroom.
Yeah, it's so funny. And then that just contributes to the surreality of it. And I think if it was, you know, you think about like a movie that keeps really aware of its space, like The Conjuring, or what was the more recent one the guy did?
Malignant.
Covered Malignant. Like, that house doesn't move or change really, but he has like this really interesting way of moving around it. This moves around itself. You know, it's just this mutant, weird, magical space of horror and destruction. And yeah, I don't know. If I was going to make a movie, I would go this route, you know, just because I don't want to say it's easier to do, but, you know, it's definitely looser.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. This movie, or these movies, but especially Evil Dead 2 and, well, all but the first one, walks that tricky line between, you know, pardon me for using parlance of a couple of years ago, but because reasons, you know, like the screenplay. Why did that happen? Because reasons. That in most films is just bad continuity or bad screenwriting. In this series of movies, it is so often subordinated to a really good kill or gag or something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like, you know, you're not gonna, anyone who was like, well, what about the blah blah blah, you'd be shut the fuck up, nerd. Like, this is just fun, you know. But and there's like some of that stuff. There's like a bunch of videos on YouTube that's like trying to like retcon this into some sort of like Groundhog Day sort of thing, and it's like what you see on the screen completely validates all that. I mean, there's just so much of it. Just like, how many shots can a double barrel shotgun possibly have? You know, it's just stuff like that is just hilarious. You know, he picks up 4 shells and there's probably like 40 shots in the movie. You know, just all that stuff is silly. And I also really appreciate that there's no rules to the Deadites. Like, you gotta cut their heads off, and sometimes that works, and then sometimes you have to blow them up, and sometimes you shoot them in the head, and like there's just really no rhyme or reason to it, which I think is like, you know, it I think that's the way like a whole bunch of like weird hellspawn should be, you know, like there should be all kind of like this menagerie of like Boschian weirdness that's very tough to navigate.
Yeah, in most horror films that have some sort of evil that has no coherent logic to it, or at least a logic that you can follow, like just, you know, randomly, like Hellraiser or Friday the 13th, you know, like there's not really a logic there. You just kind of have to go with it. In this one, I think what has really helped is that the evil is constantly laughing. So it kind of implies that this is all a game. You know, there's always this sort of question in so many horror movies that are drawn out, like, why isn't this movie 5 minutes long? Why isn't it set up, the bad guy kills the protagonist, and the movie is over? The horror movies require there to be reasons for it to go on for a long period of time, right? And it, especially in the slasher genre, they're just sort of ambling and they're ineffective killers. And so that increases the tension. Whereas in this movie, there might be a little bit of progressive entrapment. There might be a little bit of they are gaining power over time. And that's why they can't just like rise up and kill everybody or take them away to another dimension. But I think that because they're constantly laughing at and mocking the characters in the movie, it kind of implies that they're just playing with them. It's just, they're just cats with a mouse.
Yeah.
And they can take as long as they want. And it,
or they just might not be that good at doing demon shit, you know?
Possibly.
Yeah. Like they could just be like the bench, you know, and like the more serious players are dealing with like the exorcist situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you listen to any of the director commentary clips?
I did. I especially liked the one for Evil Dead 2. It definitely sounded like a favorite podcast, you know, like a group of friends getting together. And it almost felt like an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah.
Because they were kind of like riffing on and tearing apart their own movie that they are intimately acquainted with. And I thought that was really fun. That's on YouTube.
Yeah. It's fun to just hear about how much like physical damage was done to people. Just like, yes. You know, loose teeth, like broken bones. Like it just seems like mayhem. And I think that like it's like when you read about like the Rolling Stones going to some island and practicing black magic, and then they get some badass albums. Like you just want it to be kind of like that. You don't want it to be so clinical or made in a certain way. And this is certainly the era of like horror filmmaking that I like the most. I mean, it also comes out in Evil Dead 2 comes out in 1987, which affirms my theory about 1987 being the best year for films ever.
Yep.
To me, it's like peak fun. It's also like you could get your money back for your investors, but it really wasn't like, you feel like nowadays, like people could just like crank out a horror movie and probably make money off of it. Like back then, it just was not the case.
I don't know.
That's actually not true, because that's how we got to where we're at now. Now that I think about it,
by Evil Dead 2 time, people were starting to recognize that there was return on investment in horror.
Yeah.
But however, I think that one thing that's worth keeping in mind, despite that reality, is that doesn't mean a bunch of renegade filmmakers had financial backing to even get them there in the first place.
Yeah, you could do like a whole Tim Burton, Ed Wood style movie of just these guys going around in their shitty thrift store suits trying to get like funding from like real estate agents and fastener manufacturers and shit. I think that would be a fun movie.
Dude, totally. I just finished watching the HBO series Minx, which is super cute, but it is not unlike that. It's a period piece about funding a piece of feminist porn, and it's it would be great to follow these guys around and get the backstory on how this happened, but in a fictional format.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, I think that's the most fun part of If Chins Could Kill. He gets, he kind of goes down like the Xena warrior princess sort of time period, which I didn't watch that. Did you watch that show when it was out?
No, sword and sandal and associated fantasy is not really my thing. So
yeah, I'm not that. Despite the amount of D&D I used to play, I've never been much of a fan of it myself either.
Yeah.
Other than like notable exceptions, like I think like Highlander, but I think I like the modern setting of that more than anything.
Yeah. You definitely seem to gravitate towards where comedy and horror intersect. I don't know how much of a lexicon you feel you are, but can you trace a before and after Evil Dead 2? Can you see what these movies, at least in horror comedy, not just in general, the Cabin in the Woods thing, but what this came from and what it led to? Or is it not necessarily so linear?
Probably like one of the earliest horror comedy movies is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, or is it Meet Frankenstein? Yeah, it's Meet Frankenstein. It comes out in 1948. And, this is one that Tarantino, keep talking about Tarantino. I've been down this like Tarantino rabbit hole lately, which started by going down Cannonball Run rabbit hole, which is totally what I've been up to. But, like that comes out in 48, and then kind of post-war, people wanted to laugh. I'm reading that really great book about World War I and horror right now, Wasteland. And it's like everything that we think of as horror really comes out of people coming home with half their face blown off in World War I. And so there's these ebbs and flows of like levity, and I think we'll probably see a return to horror comedy in the next few years, because just things are so bleak feeling right now, and all these movies, you have all these A24 movies. And so like you think about like what was coming right before Evil Dead was like, Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. I mean, that's like in the 60s, but you had all these like really serious, heavy movies in the 70s, like Taxi Driver. And, like I'm not exactly a film historian. This is just kind of like more like my read on it. But I think that there was like a real serious grittiness, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, all the really dead serious slasher movies. And then this comes along and, it's just really, I don't know that they had like an intention to do it. They're just dudes who really liked the Three Stooges and had an idea for a horror movie. And basically like kind of did the thing where they're like, what could we make that would be cheap, that would get our money back? And they're like, oh, a horror movie. And so I don't know that it necessarily like drives horror comedy as a thing. Like the 80s are jam-packed with zany comedies, but I don't think that there's like a mandate from this movie.
Yeah.
As much as I wish there was.
Right. And do you get a sense of how public the DIY nature of this movie was? And obviously horror cinema is predicated on DIY filmmaking, but sometimes there's a little more lore to certain movies and the way they were put together, like with Chainsaw, like with these movies. But I wonder how much of their approach was inspirational to other filmmakers, or if it was just sort of, no, it was just part of the moment. They weren't doing something particularly special by doing it themselves. At that time, that's what was happening.
Well,
right?
I think like, having read the book and listened to a bazillion Sam Raimi interviews, you get the idea that like he had his vision for how he wanted shots to be. And like all the crazy DIY-ness was just simply out of necessity to get this done, and then you see something really similar, like kind of post Robert Rodriguez's Rebel Without a Camera. He kind of like self-mythologizes what it was like to shoot on video when no one else was doing it, and making a trailer and then getting experimented on yourself for $3,000 to finish making the movie for $7,000. Like there's like a lot of that myth, and I think there's probably a lot with this too. Like I think once people realize that you could just put a camera on a 2x4 and run around, it probably opens some people's eyes. But like there's also this tension where like at this time there weren't iPhones. You know what I mean? Like now you can have a cool computer and make back rooms, which is amazing looking. But like back then you still had to shoot on film. Like that was like a big concern of theirs. And one of the reasons why they did so many like testings before they made Evil Dead was because it was just simply like a matter of like, what film stock are we going to shoot on this? Like, what is affordable? What's going to look good on the big screen? Like, what's going to make this a passable, real movie? And that was something I think that has disappeared a little bit, but not really disappeared. Depending on who you ask, it's like, what is and isn't a real movie? Mm-hmm. And these guys, there's a huge emphasis on we're making a real movie, because without making a real movie, we're not going to get real investors. Like these guys at the time, they don't get to be like, I'm a film influencer and, here, like buy my supplements. Like that's not a path here. You have to either make or not make a movie, and it has to be in theaters or not, So I think it's just totally different. But I think the spirit really inspires people, because just look at like the Unnamed Footage Festival films. Those are all descendants of Evil Dead, as far as I'm concerned. Like, here's $25, the camera that we have, an idea, using camera movement to make it seem fun. Like that, I think it shows up there.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it influences Hollywood, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know. What else you got?
Well, the other thing, just thinking about horror comedy is like, horror comedy is a lot like stand-up comedy. Like when it's bad, it's fucking terrible.
Agreed.
Yeah, like if you're like for example, people love Tucker and Dale. I don't. I think it's a little too people love it, and there's literally a chipper shredder being used outside the window here, so if you can hear it, sorry, but not outside, but it's like half an acre away. But I was thinking about that movie, and it's like the jokes just don't work for me. You know what I mean? And I think like stand-up comedy, like you might love Dave Chappelle, you might not like Dave Chappelle for various reasons, but like, and I think like what's fun about comedy, or not really fun, but essential about comedy, is what horror is. Like you're either scared or you're not. You either laugh or you don't. And when you mix them together, you almost have like two ways to fail in a horror movie. Like it's like, it's not scary and not funny, then it's a real stinker. But it could be like Dead Alive.
Yeah. Isn't
scary at all, but it's fucking hilarious.
Same with Bua Medea Halloween.
Yeah, better than it should be.
There's zero scary about it, but like when it's funny, it really, really is.
Yeah. Another movie that like I think didn't work for me, even though I like Diablo Cody quite a bit as a writer, is Jennifer's Body. I just didn't think
it's not a good movie.
No, it's got like a little bit of like, people kind of have love for it now in the way that like kind of people got back into Ginger Snaps. It's sort of, people have a fond memory for it, so they're sort of reviving it as like an early 2000s thing, I guess. Just probably just because Machine Gun Kelly and Megan Fox drinking each other's blood and shit right now, but maybe that. But then you think probably the best executed horror comedy, like intentional comedy of all time, is Scream.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it stands the test of time. It's the most effective, and it has like really strong elements. Like I was thinking about like how iconic the opening scene of that movie is.
Yep.
Like, I mean, it has everything going for it. It's legitimately scary on its own terms. Like if that's the sort of thing that scares you, it kills the most famous person in it in the first scene, which is like totally not done. Yeah, I think probably people do that now. There's probably some goofs like Pete Davidson gets killed at the beginning of the new Suicide Squad, like right out the gate. You know? And he's like, he might not be the most famous person in that, but he's definitely at the time probably the most talked about. And like it sets you up for the world too. Like all the conversation that they're having really lets you know that this is a really informed and referential movie. And then the kill is good, and then it sets you up for the whole thing. Like, so I think that might be the most successful horror comedy. And I think it was intended to be like, maybe you don't get that movie without The Evil Dead, but then The Evil Dead doesn't play by any of the rules that movie says are the rules.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, as far as the internal logic of the filmmaking, I almost feel like this has more in common with a Cronenberg film or something like that than any horror movie.
Totally. I totally agree. It's definitely more on like the Lynch Cronenberg spectrum than it is like the, who's that fucking dork? The guy I hate does the the fake feminist dude.
Joss Whedon?
Yeah, Joss Whedon.
Saint Whedon?
Like that guy, like his stuff is very indebted to like rules and formal structure of the thing he's referencing.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is in the direction of, you know, what we collectively don't like about the Marvel movies, that they're just like, you know, if Captain America picks up a fucking matchbook in movie A, it's got to play off as a reference in movie D, you know, like that sort of thing. And I think, you know, like, I mean, I like all these different kinds of movies, you know, but I think to me, like a movie is more artistic when it's a little bit more surreal. Like I definitely like the David Lynch direction of filmmaking more than the very like formal, everything has to fit neatly together comic book movie shit.
I quite agree.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I'm so interested to see that new Doctor Strange movie that Sam Raimi directed, because one of the consistent criticisms I hear for it is people saying it's all over the place and it doesn't make sense. I'm like, sign me the fuck up. That's exactly what I'm looking for in one of these movies. Yeah. And I guess like some of his decisions like undermine the steadiness of the universe, which, I mean, it's the Multiverse of Madness is the name of the fucking movie. So obviously, you know, but
it's right there in the title.
Right there in the title, you fucking dorks. But yeah, like I like that. I mean, this is one of those episodes where it's like, I like this thing so much. Oh, I like this thing so much too. Like it's like almost like I'm too close to it or something.
Yeah. Next, let's do an episode about Black Flag.
Yeah, totally. Like
I like Black Flag. I do too.
They influenced all these things that I really like, that I also am not critical of at all.
Shit. Is this a short episode? What are we doing?
I don't know, man. Maybe we can catch up on some other stuff, I guess. But, you know, I feel like if you had a real Lisa Simpson type person that didn't like this movie, I would know immediately that I would not want to be hanging around with them. Like, I think that if I showed Evil Dead 2 to my wife, who is famously against all nerd shit all the time, I think she would probably enjoy it. I think she would think it was really fun, and she would probably really like, I have a feeling she would like Bruce Campbell's performance.
Yeah.
And acknowledge it as a fun movie. I think this is like one of my coworkers just showed this to his 11-year-old daughter, and she like was over the moon. Just loved it.
Also, I mean, to that, the physical comedy, I mean, I am no fan of Three Stooges, but the physical comedy in this movie is pretty inventive and weird.
Oh, it's all Three Stooges. Even the terminology, like they call, do you know what they mean when they say shimping?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that lore?
Go. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the Three Stooges, they're one of the Stooges was Shemp. Early on, it's Larry Moe and Shemp, and then comes Larry Moe and Curly. But at one point, I think the actor dies or leaves or something like that, and so they would shoot like 3 of those movies in a day, and like they had like a couple of them in progress, and they had shot it, and then that actor wasn't available anymore. So then they would just get somebody like, kind of, you know, Ed Wood style, where like Bela Lugosi dies and then the doctor is holding up the cloak. Yep. And you don't see his face. So they call it, so there's a lot of shots like that in the Evil Dead. And I think maybe even Evil Dead 2, where they just couldn't get people to come back or whatever, you know, time passed and somebody wasn't available. And so they call it shimping. And then it got to the point where I think even in later movies, even up to Spider-Man, they're always trying to shimp people in. And it got to the point where some of like the people at the studio were like, especially in Army of Darkness, you can see like the same actor in like 4 or 5 different roles. And you're like, what the fuck is going on here? But yeah, so you know, they say Sam Raimi is just always trying to make a Three Stooges movie. And that's the secret to all of his films. And the Spider-Man films are certainly like that. But man, like what a great physical actor Bruce Campbell is. Like that thing where he grabs the back of his own neck and flips himself over. That's
unbelievable.
Hard to do. It's really hard to do. And like the fact that he's doing it like 30 times in a day is just nuts.
Yeah, I mean, also the scene where his hand is attacking him is on premise, like, okay, your hand is attacking you. A competent filmmaker would turn that into one gag This movie, it's like a whole scene that's kind of brilliant and has all these ideas running through it.
That scene is, I think that might be of all the whole series, like the best scene in the whole thing. Like, just like, it's the most Sam Raimi thing. It's total physical comedy. It's also kind of like the most horrifying idea. Like, I was like, man, I don't know at what point I would have cut my own hand off. You know what I mean? I think I might have like tried, like I might have tried something else before that, you know, like, and then also like, is it zombie rules? Like, how fucking far up your arm is it? You know,
Totally.
Like, do you all of a sudden have a stump trying to jam you in the eye? Like, the whole deal. And then it sets it up for just like a fucking chainsaw hand. I mean, what an idea that is, you know, like, it's a brilliant genre idea.
Yep.
And it makes like, dude, whenever I see somebody in a good Ash cosplay costume, it makes me happy. Like, there's just like, there's something great about it. Or like a sexy female Ash, that shit's the best.
Yeah. I think one thing that could have made this movie more, given this movie more notoriety, longevity, is if the Deadites were more, there's probably a simple word for this that is not coming to mind, but like the Cenobites in Hellraiser, totally iconic. Jason Voorhees, totally iconic. The Deadites, kind of forgettable, you know? Like, if the Deadites had very noteworthy characteristics that could be replicated in Halloween costumes, this movie, especially Evil Dead 2, would have been far more perennial and evergreen.
Yeah, like, I was thinking about almost exactly the same thing when I was like, I watched it, and the thing I thought was almost the opposite. I was like, man, these creatures are so iconic. And then I thought about it, like, well, but they're not like iconic, like exactly like you said, the Cenobites, you know? And I think it's just, I mean, the elements of them, like, they definitely have like the grotesquerie, like where they look all witchy, the white plate eyes. Yeah. I think you're really like, the voice is really iconic. The way they move around, the laughter is super iconic. Like, these are all things that get copied later. But if you were a Deadite on the street in the Castro for Halloween, I don't think people would just think you were like a witch or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And a, sexy Ash costume is not a lot. Pinhead is a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think those movies just made more money too, though. You know, they were just much bigger movies. I was looking at this Reddit horror thread, and somebody asked a question that I thought was kind of interesting. They were like, are there any post-2000s horror characters that have reached the level of infamy of a Freddy or a Jason? And people were really trying to do like backflips to like say stuff. And the closest they got was like the Jigsaw thing from Saw, you know, but even then, like, I don't remember anything about like the dude that's controlling it. I don't remember his name. I don't remember why the fuck I've seen like 3 of those movies, and I don't even remember exactly what happens. Like, they're just really not that great, but I could tell you all of Freddy Krueger's bio, you know.
I think there is hope for, if there was a Malignant sequel and they drove home that character a little further and made it. Okay, so like Jason Voorhees, as we know him now, did not exist in the first movie, right?
Right.
Jason Voorhees came to be the Jason Voorhees we know. Malignant, I think, has the possibility to be an iconic horror icon.
I don't know that I agree. Like, because the thing about James Wan's other bazillion-dollar making movies, like all the Conjuring franchises, like, I mean, you kind of got like Annabelle and the Nun, but they're not like in rap videos with the Fresh Prince. You know what I mean? It's not the same scale.
Yes. They're also not good movies.
I mean, one way. I mean, you can make an argument that the Friday the 13th movies aren't good movies.
Like, very, very true. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can, and it is the holiday today. Friday, we're recording on Friday the 13th. But as far as like cultural phenomena, and then that made me think though, is like, who knows what comes out next year? You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
fucking Tarantino turned Travolta back into a household name with one movie. So you never know. Somebody could come up, James Wan especially, could come out with an absolute banger of a horror movie that becomes a best-selling costume. But I had made a comment on that thread. I was like, the only real metric is just like how many people dress up as it for Halloween. And the only costume I could think of is like in horror, and it's really horror adjacent, is people dress up as Negan, like first appearance Negan from The Walking Dead, because I think because it's an easy costume.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just not the age of like iconic horror villains.
No, I you know what? I'm thinking out loud, but I would think that, okay, for example, The Nun and Annabelle are not those iconic villains, but those movies are also not fun. And I don't mean comedy.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
But even if you like those movies or you think they're actually scary or whatever, they're not fun in the way that Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street movies are. Malignant could be. Like, Malignant is weird, and there's an I feel that's kind of, pardon me for getting hung up on this one movie, but, and it's not just about, I'm not just speaking like specifically about Malignant, but in that direction somewhere lies iconic horror villainy.
Yeah, I think if like he makes the next one and it's 10% more slapstick and they successfully pull off what they're trying to do in the movie Venom. Have you seen those movies with Tom Hardy?
No.
Okay, so Venom is a Marvel character. It's like an antagonist to Spider-Man, and kind of was a villain for a minute. And he's like this cannibalistic symbiotic creature. The suit itself is alive. And in the movie, in the comic, like the guy that is the host for the symbiote and the suit had this sort of like back and forth relationship. And there's some like, there's actually like pretty Evil Dead-ish sort of like physical comedy in the first Venom movie. But like, that character would have to be really hilarious. Like I can't remember what the name of the fucking thing in her head is.
Me neither.
And yeah, whatever, like Captain Malignant or whatever it is. That to our point, like I can't even remember the name of the villain.
Yes.
Like it's totally like, and that character is probably, I would say, arguably the most inventive horror movie character in 10 years, at least. You know. Like it's certainly original and weird. I can't remember its name.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just not a great horror fan or whatever, but but like if that character was hilarious in the next episode, it was like went to like a Freddy Krueger and Nightmare 3 sort of level.
Yes.
I could see that being like really great, but who knows? I mean, it's just like the idea of like that character killing like 60 cops. It's so absurd.
Fucking awesome. I guess one other element to this conversation is that we do have things outside of horror cinema like Slender Man, like creepypasta, or something like Salad Fingers, and Salad Fingers is the most popular thing in the world, but there are these horror, in the broadest sense, characters that exist outside of horror movie cinema that do sort of exist in the space that we attribute to Jason and Michael and Freddy.
Do you think it might also be that like Jason, Michael, and Freddy are all still kind of around and are taking up space?
I think so. I mean, I think that's why, teenagers still listen to the Ramones instead of, I mean, I'm making a sweeping generalization, but like why Metallica seems to still be relevant even with people who weren't even born when they put out their best albums.
Yeah, like fucking hang it up, Madonna, get out of here.
Well, I think it's hanging up everybody, and pardon me for being a broken record, but I do not think that people should listen to their parents' music when they're in at least until their 20s.
I think it should be Logan's Run rules where you just get killed when you're 30.
I am not saying that. I am saying that, like, I despair that children growing up being best friends with their parents and loving their same music.
Oh,
There's some continuum there that I think is unhealthy, but I'm more upset about the music aspect than I am about the friendship.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, we have a friend who's like, you know, is like a punk rock chopper guy, you know, and you know, collects vintage skateboards and shit, and his kids are all into that stuff too. And it's like, it just like seems like he like stole their rebellion from him or something. I don't. It's just
before
weird.
They even got a chance to.
Yeah, but
you should definitely you should definitely share interests with your parents. You know, like.
I totally disagree.
Well, you know, just think of like you grow up loving football together. You can go into games and stuff like that.
So, I mean, in some ways, like what's going on with my buddy and his kids, it's just the punk rock version of the normies. You know, like, I love Alabama football. I love Alabama football because my dad loved Alabama football. Like, that sort of thing is just like,
yeah.
You know, is it really that different than being into straight edge hardcore? And your kids are into straight edge hardcore? I mean, not really. Right. But I think like, I think that you and I, like, music is so tied to like subcultural affiliations that there's that at play, and that's also not normal. You know, it's common but not normal.
Yeah.
Like, I had a buddy who was like kind of a jock dude that played D&D with us, and he, like, you know, he would play like the Vampire the Masquerade game and stuff like that. And I just always remember he's just like a super normal dude, like just a regular ass Louisiana. Now he's probably a dad with a lawnmower, you know? And he was just like, can't you just like this stuff without making it your whole personality? And I just remember being at the time like, no, like there's just nothing else going on. Like, I live in the fucking suburbs, you know, like what the fuck else is up? You know, I have like moderate talents. Like, I'm not escaping this any other way. You know, I have to bolt on this fucking personality and go forward as best I can, especially if I'm going to be trying to sleep with these goth girls, you know? But I often admire people who are just like normal like that, like, but like are interested in weird shit, like the Jason Segel character in SLC Punk, who's like the most.
I forgot about that movie. What?
Yeah,
remind me.
So Jason Segel plays this character who just like wears like an Izod shirt and has like these like thick glasses and just looks like a nerd, but he's with the punk rockers and he's like the worst of them. Like, he's like the most violent. And like, and yeah, it's a really great character. I had even forgot. I watched it pretty recently. I had even forgotten that Jason Segel played that character. But it's great. But that's another movie where, you know, it's about like, do you have to put on this costume to enjoy this shit? Because at the very end of that movie, the main character like kind of gets rid of his punk rock outfit and goes to go, like, as he says, it really fuck shit up as a lawyer, which is fucking hilarious. It's like a real fun way to justify your selling out, you know?
Right.
But you could do way more damage as a lawyer than you ever could as the fucking singer of some shitty band. If you're doing it right, anyway. I guess I don't have a whole lot more to say about Evil Dead. You know, like, this is one of those things where I think if you were really into this, you should just go listen to the director's commentary, because that shit's super fun.
Yeah, I also think this is one of our episodes that's far more fandom, far less philosophy, culture.
Yeah, I went back and listened to like a more philosophically minded podcast that did an episode about Evil Dead, and their tedious half hour of discussion of the tree rape. Just, I was like, who is this for? Who is this for? Yeah,
I don't trust it.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot in general too, because I've been reading. I've just been really into like movie bios and reading about movies, how they get made, and I realized like I don't really care so much for the theory side of it as much as like hearing how the thing actually got made. Like, I went down this like really deep cannonball run watching videos about the different cars and how the movie got made and how the actual cannonball even existed, which got me into like Smokey and the Bandit, which got me into the guy who directed it, Hal Needham, and how he's like the stuntman, the Cliff Booth, the Brad Pitt character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is based on. Yeah, and it's just like that whole like chain of history is so much more interesting to me than like, you know, Canadian trans sensibilities in the second Michael Myers movie. You know, like it just I don't know, man. Maybe I've read a few like biographies of like actors and directors pretty recently, and I like all of them better than any of the theory books I've read. Yeah. But which kind of, it reminded me a little bit of like that Rob Zombie quote where when he's on Joe Rogan, he's talking about how like filmmaking is really just figuring out how to get the crane out of mud.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of reminds me of the oh God, what's his name from Pere Ubu saying that being a musician is just moving black boxes from one city to another. It's like, yeah, it's mostly that. It's more of that than it is music, you know?
Yeah. I mean, but don't you find that like sometimes like that just like journeyman, like fact in the background of everything is really what actually matters. Like it's really more about that than it is any intention, you know, like for example, you know, the famous Deadite POV shot in Evil Dead. Yeah, you could probably write some stupid fucking essay about the gaze, you know, the shaky gaze at the demonic or something like that. So it's literally like at the end of the day, it's a dude running full tilt through the woods with a 2x4, you know?
Yeah.
And like, what's really happening there? You know, is it this like bolted on intention? I guess what's fun is like, it can be all things to all people, you know, that's the David Lynch perspective.
Yeah. I appreciate that stuff. I do kind of dig the opportunity for, you know, say viewing a film like this and considering the phenomenological aspects of how the camera functions, but not as much as I like the conversation we just had. However, you know, if I can just talk about myself, the way I approach music, the way I approach art is very much that way. Like I can't speak for anybody else, but I don't feel like there's any magic to making music for me. It's like, it's work.
Mm-hmm.
I go to the studio every day and I work. I don't summon, I don't channel, I don't have any sort of like mystical experience. I go to the studio and I fucking work. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard. And sometimes I'm in a good mood and sometimes I'm in a bad mood. Sometimes I accomplish something. Sometimes the problems outweigh the inspiration. But ultimately, like, yeah, I got a job to do.
Yeah,
that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's work.
I think that reality is very at the forefront of the whole Sam Raimi Evil Dead universe too. Like, especially, like I would say, most of Bruce Campbell's book is just talking about, and it's really intended to talk about just the schlubs that are around movies that make them happen. You know, he says more about this grip that he worked with than he does about Lucy Lawless, you know?
Right.
And I think there's something kind of fun about that. And there's these like fun stories. Like this guy was like, that he worked with on, you know, Hercules or some shit like that was like Cliff Booth and Once Upon a Time, it was just an old time cowboy stuntman. And the way he got his job was in the 60s. Some Hollywood producer was walking by him while he was painting a fence in the Paramount lot. And he's like, "Hey, you're pretty big. Can you pick up a guy over your head?" He goes, "I don't know. Let me see." And he took his buddy that he was painting the fence with and picked him up over his head and was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Okay, show up tomorrow. You're in this movie." like to me, that is like such a fun, endearing story. And I would rather hear like 30 minutes about that than something more academic. And then that's totally taste. You know what I mean? But the other side of it, though, is like, I think your work is kind of informed by those sort of like academic phenomenologies. But like, what's cool is if you to make something with that sensibility rather than to analyze something with that sensibility is a totally different thing.
Can be. Although, yeah, it's funny. I like 50% agree and 50% disagree because at the same time, yeah, this black metal band is totally racist. This black metal band is transcendental, ecological anarchism. This black metal band is Christian. What's the difference? Like, well, other than what you just told me, I don't know. Like they all took different routes to a similar destination, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. You know what? Speaking of black metal and people and then art and analysis, that USBM book, that was such a think about that book compared to The Dirt. Nothing
maybe set it up. Maybe set it up for the audience what we're talking about.
Okay, so yeah, this is definitely. I mean, if you're a long time listener or listen to our black metal episodes, you'll know there's this book called USBM, which is this 500-page textbook, basically about the American black metal scene, and to a lesser extent the European black metal scene, because you have to kind of contextualize it, and it's just like this tedious taxonomy of all these bands. It's so boring. It's fucking boring. But not one. Yeah, like the only thing that made it tolerable for me to read is that Andy Connors, your bandmate, pops up in it from time to time. He's actually probably the most mentioned person in the book. But nobody does anything fun. And I would say in black metal, no one has done. The only two fun things that ever happened was the murder at the root of Lords of Chaos, and then later when Gaul from Gorgoroth put pigs on spikes. That's pretty much it. Everything else has been fucking boring.
Well, he and his husband took a trick back home, and they tied him up and tortured him, and
but that's terrible.
There's lots of bad things around that man.
Yeah. No, but okay. Now think about in the context of modern hip hop. The Babies shot 3 people and gotten off every time. There's there's drama in black metal, but there's no drama in black metal. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, American
there's
black
just
metal.
nothing. American black metal. But yeah, it's just. I don't know, man. I don't know why I even started thinking about talking about. Oh, I guess it's because we were talking about the stories of how things get made. That was one of the things that I think makes black metal feel really fake to me. Is that it's not like Motley Crue, and they're like, man, we were getting our dick sucked 40 times, and we did all this cocaine and drank Jack Daniels, and of course we made Shout at the Devil. It's more I wanted to make a black metal album. And that happens in horror, I think, a little bit too. Like Evil Dead 2 is Shout at the Devil, or even Evil Dead. I guess Evil Dead is Shout at the Devil. It's an album that it's of course informed by other things, but it's so just the wildness makes it. And then I think, I don't know. I think it's one of the things that makes some of the A24 movies so boring is that they're a little too studied.
Yeah. I think there's definitely something there. I mean, I don't totally agree, but also I definitely like you to a large degree.
I like you too.
No. I definitely privilege a sort of wildness in my art making. It's funny. Do you know who Jack Halberstam is?
That name sounds really familiar, but I don't know.
Queer theory, God. There's a book that has been threatening to be published for forever now. Nothing's come out since The Queer Art of Failure, but he has these theories about talking about wildness, and it's sort of a reaffirmation of queerness, that the way that the idea of queerness plays off of it's not gay or lesbian or bisexual. There's definitely, to say queer it's a political identity, but there's also a certain kind of wildness to it. There's a provocation there, and to Jack Halberstam, there seems to be this sort of privileging this idea of wildness, an idea of anti-assimilation, an idea of an identity that cannot be pinned down and is constantly moving. And I think that is sort of analogous to what we're talking about, allowing for and living for a certain kind of chaos is, I don't know. I dig it.
Yeah, I mean, this is all birth of tragedy shit that we're talking about right now. Like Dionysius versus Apollonian. I mean, Evil Dead is a Dionysian movie, whereas Hereditary is probably an Apollonian movie, or maybe, I don't know, something like that. It's too bad that the Hellraiser Nightbreed comics weren't more successful and didn't get like a movie treatment, because that's like what's so interesting is like the Cenobites are like this force of order, and the Nightbreed character is like a force of chaos, and it's all about these two like forces working themselves out. So I guess you kind of need both of them, but I think you're also kind of drawn to one over the other too.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this shit's all like in like Camille Paglia's shit too, like the sexual persona. Like there's this whole like dark craziness versus order.
I never read it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's like one of those 90s books, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think theory's a lot like comedy. It just generally just does not age well.
Often true. Yeah.
Yeah, I both got into and got out of Reddit while I was up here in the woods, and I was like, this is a total fucking time suck. It's stupid. But some of the like horror stuff was kind of interesting. But like somebody mentioned Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and I didn't realize how like the younger Gender Goblin set really took issue with it. Like, because I think, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, I wasn't aware of it, but I totally like kind of see what these people were talking about. But you know, I think the person who read it in the 90s and was more of a horror fan kind of maybe appreciated the idea that she sort of like told the world that it wasn't just a bunch of fucking misogynistic weirdos. And there's this idea of like of identification with the heroine. But I guess she also, and I would have never picked up on this, and maybe it's not true, maybe it's just these like new wave sensible types or sensitive types, but like that she's like, oh, you know, these characters are ultimately like, giving away their own femininity because they adopt the phallic tropes of knives and things like that. It's just kind of interesting to see how something that I think we might consider largely positive and canonical is already kind of being tossed aside as terrible. And maybe it's just only like the weird Gender Goblin scene that does that with things. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to see it pass on.
I think that kind of thing's just always going on in every way.
It seems to really happen amongst queerness. Like it seems like people are really willing to throw the early people under the bus. Like like Richard O'Brien's sort of take on trans identity is not in style at all right now, to the point where like people are like rethinking it's kind of interesting to see people like rethinking the legacy of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which Jesus Christ. I mean, I couldn't even imagine like a more welcoming queer space in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, going to see it at midnight. But now people are sort of like taking issue with like Frankenfurter is like a sexual predator and all this shit. It's just weird, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not necessarily wrong or incorrect. It's just crazy to think of something so beloved get so dragged. But
for sure.
But then, then again, we had the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Same beloved things get dragged,
Yeah.
I guess that's just the way of the world. That's what people have always done. The new generation comes along to drag the old generation.
Well, it's definitely an American thing.
You think so? There's got to be some global analogs to it. I mean, just look at like Socrates was, had his, he was shaking his fist at the clouds.
Oh, for sure. But what I especially mean is what happened in the UK and post-war America, this idea of, in the wake of what we can think of as an avant-garde, that there is an opposition to mainstream, and then the emergence of the teenager as being this independent economic force. And I think those two things converge to become something where each consecutive generation at an acceleratingly shorter loop attempts to completely undo the previous generation in a way that there's not really a precedent for. I mean, obviously things have always evolved and changed at different speeds in different cultures, but I think especially starting in the mid 20th century, that became one of the prime movers of American identity, is rejecting one's parents and their values and restarting everything anew. And we're on the West Coast. We're at the epicenter of what that means.
Yeah, it reminds me of that scene in Mad Men when I think it's an early season where Don Draper goes out to Los Angeles for the first time, and he comes back, and he's like, everything's so new, and he's like kind of comparing Los Angeles to New York, and he has like a preference for it, which I thought was kind of interesting. Yeah. Like he's, a character that like, I think a modern person would think of him as like so old fashioned, but he was so oriented towards like a love for, the cutting edge.
Yeah. The reinvention, the self-reinvention. I mean, that's part of the interesting thing about Don Draper is he's this iconic, like the weird thing about the American male, but what is so compelling about the legacy of the North American male is this whole mythology of reinvention.
Yeah. I mean, and then, to this day, you can still like, like I think whenever I'm like thinking like, oh, what am I going to do in my 5-year plan? There's always like an element of reinvention to it, and I think I'm so influenced by like artists who like decided to be like a character, like Larry the Cable Guy or Dice Clay or something like that, where you're like, to me, it's like, oh, will I be performing CMO of a company, in 5 years' time?
Right.
Yeah. Hopefully. I need that money.
Chief marijuana officer? What business are you going into? I don't know what CMO is.
Yeah. Oh, it's a chief marketing officer. It's
marketing,
like a C-level marketing role.
Got it.
Yeah. I'm kind of committed to that dark path. I think I've just, there's no getting out of it now. I'm not going to go like raise goats or some shit, even though I've been caring for goats for a few weeks and it's very fun. I just not much of a career.
Yeah. And speaking as someone who just started grad school this week, reinvention is real.
Yeah. So that seems to be going pretty well.
So far, so good.
Yeah. So hopefully you'll emerge with a lucrative career
that without drowning in the debt that begat it.
Oh man, I think about like the bullet I dodged with law school. Well, thank God.
Yeah,
that would have been terrible. Although who knows? You never. I mean, I think things just go. I don't know how much control you really have over life in general. Anybody,
Yep. Well, that is something I'm focusing on. How much are you at the mercy of your elements and even yourself?
I think that's all I got for Evil Dead, man.
Yeah, I think I'm the same way. All right. So thanks for hanging in there, everybody, for I think what might have been the longest space between episodes. But we're gonna, as soon as I find a better rhythm with school, balancing it with other things, hopefully we can get back on track. You can email us at whattthe, @scarythoughts.org. And anything else, Chad?
That's it.
Thanks for listening.
Yep.